So we'll now have a fireside chat moderated by Som. Fair warning, I did tell Som, does the professor know he's going to walk into a room full of accountants? For those who attended the lectures, will know this was not new. But I'd love to hear the conversation now. Over to you.
Do we have a microphone? Yeah.
Need one more mic.
I think a couple of confessions before we begin. Number one, I think this is an honor to be on this stage with you, sir. So, Professor Aswath Damodaran. Number two, by far, I feel this is the toughest job that has been given to me tonight. So I'll see what I can do. But I can tell you this, sir. On behalf of the ICAI Singapore chapter, we are extremely delighted that you are here with us this evening, and we are experiencing it live. So thank you so much for that. We have a range of topics to cover, and we'll try to get to it quickly. My first question to you, sir, is on storytelling. We as CAs are very good with numbers. You have emphasized on the fact that we should understand the company's narrative more than anything else. So can you share a little bit more about that? For example, you compared the story of Amazon to the field of dreams, for example. So share with us something on that and help us try to conquer the struggle between the left mind and the right mind.
I'll give you the origins of, because one of my books is Narrative and Numbers. I did sign it for somebody just now. And I'll give you the origins for why I wrote the book and why I've made this so much a part of my class. This morning when I was teaching my valuation, I'm teaching a 2-day valuation seminar. I was talking to the group about my very first valuation. I did it in 1981. And I talked about the process I went to value the company. I said I wrote to the company, physically wrote to the company, asking them to send me an annual report in the mail. I remember telling this to my kids, and they said, why don't you go online and download? 1981, there was no online to download. No. And so I wrote to the company and to give the company credit, 2 weeks later I got the annual report in the mail. I opened the annual report, and here's what was on my desk to value the company. I had a ledger sheet. How many of you have seen a ledger sheet? Just a blank sheet of paper with lines drawn through. I love the fact that the lines were already drawn through because I could never get them straight. Okay? But it's a blank sheet of paper. A calculator, very early stage calculator, which is the kind of calculator you get for free now when you subscribe to something, right? Addition, subtract, and I know it might have a raise to the power, which I thought was a great innovation. And a pencil. I learned very early that pens don't work. Because you start entering numbers in pen and then you change your mind, everything has to get scratched out. And I valued the company. I don't even remember what the company was. Just 2 weeks ago, I valued Tesla. I went to their website. I downloaded every single annual report the company had ever released in its life. They're all on the website, 2008 through 2023. Took all of 5 minutes. Then I went to S&P Capital IQ, which I have access to, which is a global database, and downloaded 80 accounting line items for every single publicly traded automobile company in the world for the last 10 years. Took another 10 minutes. I have Excel, I have tools I could not even have dreamed about. So and this is true for almost everybody. We have more data than we ever could have dreamed about having 40 years ago, and more powerful tools. If I just pause there, this is good news, right? Valuations must be getting so much more sophisticated, so much better than they used to be. And I've been an observer of valuations now for 40 years. I've seen, I track banking valuations, private equity, venture capital. Though venture capitalists can't value anything, they can price everything. So basically, valuations across the spectrum. And in my experience, the quality of valuation has become worse rather than better. So about a decade ago, I started thinking about, hey, what's missing? We have better data, we have more powerful tools. Why aren't valuations getting better? And the answer, I think, is we've let the tools take over. Most valuation classes have become modeling classes. You become an Excel ninja. You learn the keystrokes that'll make every other line a different color. Congratulations. That really does wonders when you value. And he said, what? And I think what we're missing, what we've forgotten, is when you value a company and enter inputs, whether you like it or not, you're telling a story about a company. I do this exercise in my class. I take somebody who's a pure number cruncher who's done an Excel spreadsheet valuation of a company, and I take the Excel spreadsheet and I read it as a story back to them and say, is this the story you meant to tell? They said, no, that's not the story. Well, that's what your Excel spreadsheet is telling me. I'll give you an example. A company that has a 30% growth rate every year sees its margins go from 12% to 22%. Implicitly, you're telling me a story of a big and growing market where competition is going to be weak, right? Implicit in that. I say, is that the story? And many people are surprised by the stories that their own valuations are telling. So when you value a company and you input those numbers that drive the value, whether you like it or not, you're telling a story. You might as well flesh out what that story is and make sure you buy into your own story, right? Even if other people don't, you have to buy your own story. And in the process, sometimes you're going to realize your story doesn't make sense. Which to me should be a red flag. Or go back and revisit your numbers, because your numbers don't match what you think is a reasonable story. So I wrote the book Narrative and Numbers to talk about making stories explicit, how every valuation starts with a story. And I used a 5-step process. I value Uber, I value Amazon, I value, no, the 5-step process. The 5 steps are my steps. I need them because I'm a natural number cruncher. I have to force myself to tell stories because otherwise my natural inclination is to open the spreadsheet, start doing the valuation, and I have to stop that. And it didn't come naturally to me. First time I tried to tell a story, I remember it was the early 90s. It was like pulling teeth. It's not going to come easily if you're a natural number cruncher. And many of you, I would love to say natural number crunchers, but you're Indian. You're accountants because your parents wanted you to be accountants. You might have wanted to be poets, and your father said, what the heck are you thinking? Poets make no money, accountants do. But I assume that you became accountants because you like numbers, you're comfortable with numbers. If you're more naturally number crunchers, that means you're not that comfortable telling stories. But it's a craft. Each time you do it, you will get better. That's the good news. I'm not going to say I'm a natural storyteller now, but it's easier for me to do it now than it was 10 years ago. Each time I do it, I think it gets a little easier. And you're going to discover that it makes your valuations have soul. I mean, no, it's not the word your valuation will have a soul and a story. And you know what? The history of humanity, human beings remember stories a lot better than they remember numbers. I run an exercise in my class where I show them an Amazon Excel spreadsheet valuation. And I show them the numbers, I lead them through the growth rates and margins, and then I tell them a story. And 5 minutes later, I come back and say, do you remember what growth rate I used in my Excel spreadsheet? Nobody remembers. You remember what margins I targeted? Nobody remembers, but they all remember my story. The Field of Dreams story, and the reason I picked that is, Field of Dreams, of course, is a movie, and it's a movie that had a wide, many younger people might not have seen it, but it's a movie where, Kevin Costner, I think, builds a baseball field in the middle of one of the Midwestern states, Iowa, somewhere in the middle of cornfields. And he finishes building the baseball field. His neighbor, who probably lives 10 miles away because these are farms, comes over and says, what the heck are you doing? Building a baseball field in the middle of nowhere. One of the most famous lines in moviedom. He says, if we build it, they will come. He's saying, what's this got to do with Amazon? If there's one theme that if you think about Amazon all through its life, that's been the theme. We build it, they will come. Build what? If we build revenues, profits will come. It's got patience built into its DNA, kind of captures the company. In fact, until 2012, that was my driving story. 2012, took another look at Amazon and said, this isn't a Field of Dreams company, it's a disruption machine. Because what's Amazon's business? Any business that it sees that looks soft, right? That's basically what Amazon targets. It'll go after any soft business. So if you're in a soft business, I'd look over my shoulder constantly. What are soft businesses? Soft businesses are businesses that are big, where everybody's unhappy. The providers are unhappy because they don't think they make enough money. The consumers are unhappy. Do you know businesses like that? No, I know lots of them. Banking. Who's happy in banking? Bankers complain about how difficult the business is. Banking consumers act in and say, why are you in the 20th century still? It's ripe for a disruptor, right? Education. Who's happy? Universities complain that they always lose money. They always seem to lose money. The faculty are unhappy. The students are unhappy. It's only a matter of time. Amazon University. Hey, it's coming. And I won't shed a tear for traditional universities when it happens. Disruption machine. Right? When I think of Netflix, I think of one of those hamsters on a wheel that cannot get off. It's a hamster on a wheel, right? Because it's built this machine of, we're going to add subscribers. How do you add subscribers? You have to make more content. And as it becomes global, it's got to add content. When I open up Netflix, half the shows I see are from India. So basically, they must see this as this is their only growth market left. There's no way you get off that hamster on a wheel. Their biggest problem is they spend so much on content that even if they add subscribers, they can't figure out a way to make money on a consistent basis. So when you look at companies, think about the traditional financial data, but think about what's the story that best describes it. And it's an incredibly useful device if you run the company, right? Because your job as a CEO is not to come up with marketing details, but to tell the story for your company in a way that you convince investors, convince employees about that story, and then act consistently on that story. It's what Jeff Bezos did so well, that allowed Amazon as much breathing room as they did. So I know it took way too long, but no. Yeah.
And we're just we love listening to your anecdotes. Excellent. So we'll hold on to that term you just used, craft. We have used, or we have heard this term called valuation is more art than science. But Professor, you just mentioned it's a craft. It's like building a bridge for the present to the future. So could you share a little bit more about that? And I think you mentioned about the 5-step process, which includes the feedback loop. Can you tell us more about the 3P test?
The 3P test is a test, because when you tell a story, especially if you like a company, you can tell all kinds of stories, right? You can tell fairy tales. But you're trying to value a business, not tell a fairy tale. You can't create 3-headed dogs like J.K. Rowling did in Harry Potter and get away with it in a business because dogs have one head. Not unless you have a dog at home that has 3 heads. I'd love to see it. No. So one of the tests I run to make sure that I haven't told a fairy tale is I stop and ask the question, is it possible? Is it plausible? Is it probable? Sounds like I'm playing on words, right? But I'll give you a very simple example of the contrast between those words. Possible is the easiest test. Basically, you just have to show that somebody's done something like this before. Plausible means that you've tried it somewhere and it's worked. Probable means you can go further and say, this is what it'll look like scaled up. So about 6 years ago, I was in Latin America and I was doing this 3-city tour. On day 1, I was in Sao Paulo, Brazil, with 300 Brazilians in the room. And say day 2, I was in Lima, Peru. And day 3, I was in Santiago, Chile. Or actually, Chile came second and Lima came third. So first day I'm in Brazil and I'm doing this narrative numbers. I do a 2-hour session on connecting stories to numbers in the 5-step process. And I get to this 3P test and I say, as I was thinking about how to prepare this for this Brazilian audience, I wanted to pick a topic that every person in the room would have a point of view on. So with 300 Brazilians in a room, what's the one thing you can pick as a topic where every person's going to be interested? What are Brazilians crazy about? Football. It was 6 months before the 2018 World Cup. So I asked, is it possible that Brazil will win the World Cup? You asked 300 Brazilians 6 months before a World Cup, is it possible that Brazil will win the World Cup? The answer is, of course, yes. We won it 5 times before. I said, okay. And I said, is it plausible that Brazil will win the World Cup? Now, if I'd asked this question in December of 2014, the room would have been shaky. For those of you who don't track football or follow football, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But there was a World Cup in 2014 in Brazil. Does anybody remember what happened in that World Cup? In the semifinal, Brazil played Germany. One of the great shellackings of all time, they lost 8-2. It's kind of that black moment in Brazilian history they tried to forget. So they were shaky after that, but by 2017, they were feeling pretty good. They said, yeah, you know what, it's plausible, we're second ranked in the world. Then I said, is it probable that Brazil win the World Cup? And now you could see the wheels go into motion. We're put in the right group, and Neymar stays healthy, and this happens, you can win the World Cup. That's basically possible, plausible. It works so well in Brazil that I decided to use it in Santiago. The next day I should have done my homework, but I get to Santiago and I said 200 Chileans in the room. I said, is it possible that Chile will win the World Cup? And what happened? Half the room started weeping, grown men weeping. And I said, what the heck did I do? It turned out that the week earlier, Chile had played Argentina, had lost 2-1, and had been knocked out of World Cup contention. And I think one of the things that you need to win the World Cup is you actually have to be there, right? So it turned out that it was not, I didn't have the heart to ask, is it plausible, is it probable? But remember, when you listen to a founder story and you ask a question, you very quickly realize it's a fairy tale. There's no point following up and say, what cost of capital did you use? You're telling a fairy tale, you can do whatever you want. I'm going to let you get away with it. So possible, plausible, and probable is really a way of taking stories and making sure that the stories pass basic business tests, that you've not been carried away. In fact, when I teach my valuation class, one of the assignments that everybody in the class has is every week they have to watch at least one Shark Tank episode. Is there an Indian version of Shark Tank now? Right? So you know how Shark Tank works. There are 5 sharks, venture capitalists, private successful investors, and you have people presenting business ideas that they then ask, 20% for 20 million, whatever it is. So, but my students are required to pause because most Shark Tank episodes now are just recorded. You can pause after the founder tells their business story and think of 3 questions they can ask the founder to decide whether the story that's being told is possible. It's a great exercise. Try it out. It makes you think about what are the questions I would ask a founder to decide whether it's a fairy tale, whether the fairy tale has legs, whether it's plausible. If it's plausible, what are the things I would ask to be, And I think it's an exercise we have to constantly go through with our own stories. Because the human capacity for self-delusion lies deep. And we really, really like something. I call these runaway stories. You stop asking questions. In my class, I used the Theranos example. You have a 19-year-old who claims to have invented a new way to test. You run a blood test with drops of your blood, not buckets of your blood. And it's going to do it for $45. You want that person to succeed. You stop asking questions, then what do you have? You have Theranos. What if I told you I'm going to start a real estate business where I'm going to lease buildings for 20 years and then sublease them for 3 months apiece? If you're a real estate person, what's your reaction to that? That's a dumb idea. It's never worked. You know why it doesn't work? Because you've got a duration mismatch made in hell, right? In good times, you fill the building. In bad times, everybody empties out. But think of a company that got priced at 90 billion, which did exactly that, right? Scaled up 100 times. I drove by the WeWork building in Singapore. It still has the WeWork name. I guess the bankruptcy hasn't found its way there.
Yeah,
Huh?
perfect.
But this was a business that got to the verge of going public at a $90 billion pricing. And the only reason was backed up by somebody that people thought was such a genius that if he did it, then good sense didn't matter, right? He must have seen a way to get around the duration mismatch. I'm of course talking about Master Son, who's got a God complex. I mean, who makes 300-year plans, right? People with God complexes. That's not a good quality to bring to the game if you're thinking about, is it possible, is it plausible, is it probable?
Wow, amazing. Professor, you mentioned about corporate life cycle, right? Startups, growth, mature companies. It's like companies must act their age.
Yeah.
And then we hear this nice term called sustainability, which effectively means that companies can survive forever. They don't have to worry about their age. So the concept of life cycle then becomes rather controversial. So what's your take on that?
There's what I call a theocratic trifecta. I do a session on this. The theocratic trifecta uses, I'm talking about three words that have become these buzzwords. One is ESG, the second is impact investing, the third is sustainability. I call them the theocratic trifecta because theocratic trifecta, you come from a position of virtue. You can't argue against it. This is what good people do. And in the process, I'm sorry? In the process, what tends to happen is people stop asking questions because who wants to be a bad person? I'm a dabbler. I have very little interest in deeply immersing myself in any topic. So for much of the last decade, I saw ESG mentioned, but I wasn't really that interested in it. In 2019, I decided to take a look at ESG, and I'll get to sustainability in a moment because I'd never seen a concept take off this much and get as much establishment buy-in at ESG did, right? McKinsey had bought into it, BlackRock with 11 trillion, and Larry Fink was talking about it. So I said, I want to see whether there's something there. So I went looking. And the more I looked, the less I found. Now, you know what I think about ESG. I won't go there because it's going to be a tirade. But it's the most, it manages to pull off a really tough trick. It manages to be both empty and toxic at the same time. That's tough to do, right? If you're empty, nobody cares, but this is empty and toxic at the same time. In fact, if any of you work in ESG, I'm going to say something that you're probably not going to like. There are only two groups of people in ESG: useful idiots and feckless knaves. The useful idiots think they're changing the world by working in ESG. The feckless knaves know they're not changing the world, but they make a lot of money anyway. Larry Fink, feckless knave. No debate here. A lot of McKinsey is joined in the game. So my 2019 is I said, look, you guys keep talking about all this stuff, but when I go, look, there's nothing there. And that was my 2009. I started from a position of curiosity. 2020, I revisited the topic. But I said, if it's so empty, how come it's being pushed? And the answer became a cynical one. Remember the old legal saying, cui bono? Who benefits? Work backwards. So I said, who benefits from ESG? You got ESG measurement services, right? Refinitiv, Sustainalytics. They feed their scores to investment funds, which create funds, ESG funds, which they charge BlackRock on its carbon transitions fund, which is almost exactly identical to their regular ETF. 497 of the 500 stocks are in both funds, charges 3 times more. The fund managers then talk to the disclosure people because this system needs, so KPMG and Ernst & Young are loving this moment, right? Because this is another 100 pages and they'll have ESG specialists. And of course, companies now want to increase their ESG and McKinsey says, we'll tell you how to do it. The gravy train is full of gravy, and I started identifying all of the people around. Say, I see why ESG is being pushed. A lot of people are making money on it, and none of them can walk it back. I went from curiosity to cynicism. And then Russia invades Ukraine, and all of a sudden, I went beyond cynicism. Because remember, all of a sudden, what was going to get redefined because the world had shifted. One of my favorite news stories was actually a news story that, this is how the news story read. I cut it out right out of the Wall Street Journal. Philip Morris donates 500,000 cigarettes. If I stopped right there and I asked you to make an ESG judgment, Philip Morris, already what? Bad company, terrible cancer cause. You're giving away 500,000 cigarettes, that's even worse. You're causing to Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines. All of a sudden it's starting to get murky, right? Ukrainians are the good guys, they're giving cigarettes to the good guys who are caught in those trenches. And you saw this after, all of a sudden, weapons manufacturers had to go from bad companies to good companies because it depended on who you sold the weapons to, right? Nuclear energy came back from the dead because you didn't have enough fossil fuels because you were buying Russian gas. It's now cut off. I was beyond cynicism now. I said, this is absolute chaos. And I wrote a piece in 2022 and I said, you know what? Don't expect ESG to go away, but expect it to get renamed and repackaged. There's too much money at play here. And I threw out a few suggestions, and one of them was sustainability. By itself, sustainability is a good word, right? We want the climate to be sustained. Why? Because we're all on the planet. We want the earth. Oh, everybody. Do we want companies to make sustainable products? Absolutely. We want our shoes to last for longer. We want our computers. But sustainable companies, what does that even mean? So I was asked to actually give a talk a few weeks later to 50 chief God only knows where all these are. CSOs. I said, what's a CSO? It's a Chief Sustainability Officer. And I said, what do they do? And nobody seemed to know. So I waited. These are 50 big companies. The CSOs all came in. It was an online session. So I said, what do you guys do? You're Chief Sustainability Officers. We look at each other, and so I said, let me give you some suggestions on what a CSO is, and tell me which one of these fits. I said maybe you're like Dalai Lamas, right? You got this vision of what's good in the long term. Maybe the way you prepared for this, you went to a cave in the Himalayas. You spent 5 years. You developed it. No, maybe you're just deep thinkers. They looked at me and said, no, that's not us. No. I said, maybe you're like Jiminy Cricket in the Pinocchio movie. Have you ever seen this? Jiminy Cricket is the conscience. Maybe you're there and you're the conscience of the company. As a company, you can't do that, you can't do that. No. Or maybe you're like the people who used to do the mummies for the pharaohs. Remember the pharaohs wanted to live forever? Your job is to keep companies going forever. And they had no idea what they were doing. And in a sense, that's, I think, the core problem with sustainability is, what are you sustaining? Is it the climate? Is it the planet and products? In which case, I'm with you. But if it's a company, what's the point of sustaining a company whose purpose is done? Do you want to sustain a tobacco company for the next 200 years? What exactly do you do? A company is a legal entity. When the purpose for your existence is gone, you should leave. If you don't leave, you suck up resources and you end up like Europe. Europe is full of zombie companies, stomped out of their existence way back in the past, but they kept alive because somehow there's this vision of a company that dies is admitting failure. I think sustainability, people have to decide what exactly they're sustaining. Just don't give me that word and say, okay, buy into it. It's a good word, because from the perspective of business, I don't even know what it means. I don't think the people who push the word know what it means. So next time you heard somebody talk about sustainability, ask them what they're sustaining. Right? What is it that you mean? They'll give you all kinds of baloney, but don't fall for it. Push them with specifics. What exactly would this mean in a retail company to be sustainable? Now I give the example, Gillette. What if, Gillette could come up with a blade that lasted forever? This is good, right? What would happen to Gillette as a company? Remember, this is a company that makes its money not on the original razor, but on the blades. That's the kind of dilemma that you got to deal with. If you look at where sustainability came, it came from I think Harvard Business School exists to create buzzwords that consultants can sell. It's the only reason for its existence. The sustainability as a concept was born in Harvard Business School. It's packaged and sold, and I'm not surprised it has no substance because that's Harvard Business School. It's substance-free and buzzword-rich. Consultants love it. In fact, I call Harvard Business Review the QAnon for consultants, right? Basically, you make up stuff and you sell it out there, and consultants take and run with it. Right? So I'm waiting to see what's. I wrote about ESG in 2019, 20, and 21. I wrote about impact investing this year on my blog, but what exactly are you impacting? What's the biggest problem? Impact investing is about creating change in society while you invest, right? What's the biggest target for impact investing? What's been the biggest target over the last decade? Climate change, right? And almost $5.5 trillion has been impact investing in that purpose. You know what percentage of our energy came from fossil fuels in 2009? 82%. You know what percentage of energy came from fossil fuels in 2023? 82%. So what the heck are you impacting? Where's all this green energy stuff showing up? So I said, if the definition of insanity is you keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different outcome, impact investing is certifiably insane, because what you claim to be impacting is not showing up. And their reaction was, we're spending so much money. Spending so much money doesn't stop climate change. It's creating energy that's not fossil fuel energy, right? So I argued that impact investing, there's something wrong with the process that's causing it not to have impact. Because it tries to do it through market mechanisms, right? And market mechanisms create counter effects. So one of the ways impact investing is supposed to work is you sell fossil fuel stocks. By doing that, you push down the price, you push up their cost of equity. You push up the cost of equity, they're supposed to invest less in fossil fuels. And it works, right? Public companies, oil companies. So they sell the key word is sell their fossil fuel reserves. Do you know the last 15 years, private equity investors have invested $1.1 trillion in fossil fuel reserves that they're buying from fossil fuel companies like Exxon, Mobil, and Royal Dutch, that impact investors are getting them to sell. Congratulations. Engine One, activist investing, got Exxon. They danced, look, we won, we got Exxon Mobil to sell it. No, you just moved it behind the curtain. So instead of Exxon Mobil developing these reserves, you have Carlyle developing the reserves. Good luck with you, because you've taken your oil reserves out of the hands of companies we had at least a chance of influencing how they were developed, and put it in the hands of some of the least scrupulous people on the face of the earth. And this is your definition of a win? So I've done ESG, I've done impact investing. Sustainability is next on my list. I've already got enough enemies with ESG and impact investing to add to that list this year. And in fact, an FT article that I wrote, that some of you might have read on ESG, was the most read opinion piece in FT, and not always in a good way for me, So sustainability is next on my target list, and I'm coming for those guys. I'm really, because I want to know what the substance here is. What exactly does it mean when you talk about sustainable? Yeah, because I don't think that until we get clarity on that, we can get any kind of substance to it.
Professor, we really love your, this infinite ability to share those anecdotes and analogies, and share these complex
To piss
things so
off people.
easily.
I have an infinite capacity to piss off people. I've lost the censoring mechanism I might have had. I've always had a weak censoring mechanism. It's now gone. It's one of the advantages of never having consulted in my life, never having formal relationships with any company is I frankly stopped caring. I'll say terrible things about Goldman Sachs and Larry Fink, and there's nobody who can pick up the phone and say, oh, you can't do that. So whatever you want to ask me because I'll give you exactly what's on my mind. No.
I wish we had more time and we keep talking about these,
So I'm glad
these
you're not bringing
topics.
up the Adani group, but that's fine.
Please, everyone, share.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are, correct. But anyway, we have to bring this fireside chat to a close, thanks to our time. But thank you, Professor. That was really good. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being patient listeners. That is Professor Aswath Damodaran for you guys.